And welcome to this episode of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake, Humboldt, and Ankeny, Iowa. Well, how are you today? I hope you're doing well, taking a little bit of time for yourself, and welcome to today's program. Today we're going to be discussing the life of a very influential man. A man that has affected the stock market, a man that has affected the economy. He's affected you and I as investors and pre-retirees and retirees as well. Who could this man be? Well, his name is Alan Greenspan. Recently, Alan was called home at the age of 100. And though I don't know that there's really enough time to study such a rich life of change and influence as this gentleman had, we're certainly going to pick out a few things that I think are humorous and things that I think are interesting, and maybe even draw a lesson or two or something that you and I can take away today and apply to our own unique set of circumstances. If you're brand new to this program, the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show, well, I just want to say not only welcome, I also encourage you to look around. I encourage you to go to our website, johnsonwim.com, where there's just a wealth of information there, an abundance of topics and financially relevant articles to help you better learn and be more prepared for retirement. You know, you didn't just take all this risk and save all this money to simply let it disappear into thin air once you retired. You saved this money so that not only could you have the retirement of your dreams, but you could do a whole bunch of things in retirement. And it's going to take income to be able to accomplish those goals. Well, if you've never thought about it, taking that bucket of money and turning it into a maximum income stream that will last the rest of your life is not only a very noble plan and goal, but it's also a very difficult challenge for a lot of investors, a lot of retirees. And so I encourage you, watch past videos, listen to the podcasts, even pick up a copy of my book, The Capitalized Retirement, and really study it, digest it, apply it to your unique set of circumstances so that you can get what you deserve. Principle that maximizes income for you every single month. So not only can you do the fun stuff, but when you pass away, you're leaving a legacy of your principle behind. So, Alan Greenspan, number one, it was so hard to hear that he did pass away, but man, I have to say, he lived 100 years of age. He passed away in his home from complications of Parkinson's, which I'm sure was no fun at all. But man, 100 years and being able to pass away at home, what a wonderful way to go, I guess. And you know what? This gentleman he's almost timeless. But you know what? Before Alan Greenspan became a world-renowned economist, did you realize that he was a Juilliard jazz musician? That's right. He studied at Juilliard and professionally played in jazz bands. He played the clarinet, he played the saxophone, he visited and toured various different jazz orchestras and various jazz, what would you call it, I guess, jazz band places? I don't know what you would call that, but he played in all those probably smoky dives and enjoyed himself, but then decided that he was going to become an economist. You know, sometimes your life can take a very interesting turn, and no doubt that's exactly what happened to Alan. Now, with that being said, what is so special about Alan Greenspan? A fact, aside from the fact that he was a jazz musician and he was an economist and he was 100 years of age when he died. Well, number one, I think it's very interesting that he served for nearly 20 years as the chair of the Federal Reserve. And when you think about it, he was there for so long, he counseled and advised 4 different presidents of various different inclinations, and he served during some of the best as well as some of the worst times in American stock market history. He came into office in 1987. He did not exit until 2006. So not only was he there for a better part of the vast majority of the longest secular bull market in stock market history, but he was also there for the dot-com bubble and for most of its recovery, which we're going to talk about here shortly. So Alan Greenspan, what was his job? Well, as we kind of already know, the Federal Reserve says that they have a dual mandate. Their job is to maintain price stability and control inflation. And the reality is that we've had obviously a very drastic change in kind of the operations of the Federal Reserve over the course of time. Alan Greenspan was under the impression, very much like Kevin Warsh today, who is the Federal Reserve Chair, that whatever he said needed to be interpreted. Whatever he said needed to be ambiguous and gray. Whatever he said, it needed to be interpreted in such a way where you needed an absolute, some sort of a set of codes on the side so that you can interpret and identify what he was trying to say. In fact, one time he told Congress, if I seem unduly clear to you, you must have misunderstood me. His job was to be ambiguous and very unclear because he did not want the words that he spoke to necessarily cause the market to move. And you know what? That's what the market has always sought to do. It has always scrutinized the words of the Federal Reserve. Certainly you remember the name of Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke would come out and he would rattle his saber and say that interest rates were going to go one way or the other. And what would happen to the stock market the very next day? It would either rise sharply or it would plummet. He was maybe not so much on the shall we say, ambiguous side. He was very clear, very concise, and very blunt in what he thought. Alan, however, was kind of a master. He was the guy that was cloaking the words that he needed to say in other words that were very deep, words that were very, shall we say, dense, and never really gave Congress much of a clear impression of which direction the Federal Reserve was going to go. Well, here's something comical. The social media of the day really only comprised of three things: the TV, the radio, and the newspaper. Now, here's the thing. When Alan Greenspan is speaking and you can't understand him, you don't know which direction the interest rates are going to go with the Federal Reserve, guess what you have to do? You have to now relent to other forms of reading the tea leaves. So over the course of time, social media began to develop what they called the briefcase indicator. That's right. The news media outlets became so obsessed with the thickness of Alan Greenspan's briefcase from one speech to another. In fact, they developed a theory that if the briefcase was thicker this time, there was likely going to be a rate increase. Why? Well, because of course he had to have all of the material in his briefcase to show proof and data and statistics and all of those things. Whereas if he walked into a meeting and his briefcase was thinner, well, they all indicated that either interest rates were going to stay the same or interest rates would actually decrease. Alan Greenspan loved his personal time in the morning. In fact, he wrote most of his speeches while in the bathtub. Now, I've heard of being able to write a speech in a relaxed environment, but that one takes the cake. But here's the thing. He not only was one to try to keep the economy moving, inflation in check, and the stock market growing along with the economy, but he also tried to respond quickly to the shocks that sometimes the stock market, and even to this day, still experiences. Things that kind of come out of nowhere. And this is what the economy and the stock markets, basically the traders on Wall Street, started referring to as the Greenspan put. Whenever a shock would hit the economy or hit the market, kind of like Asia having a problem with their stock market back in the late 80s. Well, what would happen was he would ease the mindset of the stock market by dropping interest rates, and that kind of gave investors and traders a bit of a safety net. It became a thing. Now, later, he did admit to regretting it because he thought that the bankers weren't being as responsible as they should have been in protecting their clients, and part of it was because of the interest rate manipulation that the Federal Reserve was doing and is still doing today. But I think that there's two lessons that I'd like us to take away from Alan's life. First and foremost, you will notice that we now have a new chair at the Federal Reserve. His name is not Jerome Powell, but rather it is Kevin Warsh. And where Jerome Powell has, I think, done a fairly decent job of being very transparent and very clear with you and I as he speaks to us and speaks to Congress about the interest rate, the economy, where they see things headed. Kevin Warsh is more like Alan Greenspan. Kevin Warsh wants to not only make certain that he is being more gray, more ambiguous, but in general, he does not want to be nearly as transparent as to the direction that the Federal Reserve is going than previous chairs of the past. This is something that worked to the advantage of Alan Greenspan, so the market was not jolting in one direction or another, having a knee-jerk reaction to what he said or what they thought he said. Second of all, I want to remind you of the one indelible moment in time that Alan Greenspan absolutely nailed it and yet was still so far away. The year was 1996, and this is something that if you listen to past shows, you're going to hear me reference this because it is such a indelible time in history. You see, Alan was concerned about America. He was concerned about inflation. He was concerned about the cost of goods. He was concerned about the stock market and the wealth that the stock market created and or could completely wipe out if it went the wrong direction. And during the mid-1990s, this was the advent of the internet. And as you can imagine, as you probably well know, as you may even remember, the stock market in the mid-1990s to 2000 literally went straight up. Alan Greenspan was quoted as commenting to Congress in 1996 that what he was witnessing in the stock market was what he called irrational exuberance. My friends, think about that. That was the period of time in which a tech bubble was growing. Now, why do I say that he got it so right? Well, he got it right because human beings, you and I, we are susceptible to emotions. We have the emotion of fear. We have the emotion of greed, and it can drive us to or away from. But Alan Greenspan was looking at the feeding frenzy, and he was concerned because he saw too much frothiness. Now, he was right, saying that it was irrational exuberance. We had investors that were paying money for stocks, for corporations that weren't even profitable. Guess what, my friends? We do that today an awful lot. There are corporations, even within the tech space, that haven't made a single dime of profit, and yet their stocks are trading in the New York Stock Exchange. Investors are buying them, and investors are paying premium for those stocks. But he was so wrong. Why? Because, well, the stock market didn't crash for 4 more years. And I don't want to give that to you as an excuse to say, see there, you're premature. You have no cause for concern. You have no worry. Because, my friends, when we see price to earnings ratios, what they are today, to give you the example I've always used, a price to earnings ratio of 41 is similar to you spending $4.1 million to buy an ice cream parlor that makes $100,000 a year. That'd be pretty silly of you to do such a thing. And yet, that's what so many investors are doing today. Just because they see others buying the stock, just because they may see the exuberance and the optimism, and they feel that it's going to go up and there's no way that it could lose, and this time it's going to be different. My friends, those were all the same warning signs that Alan Greenspan watched as the economist who served nearly 2 decades and under 4 different presidents. He knew what he was talking about then. And potentially, his lessons could be brought forward to today's market. So, do you have someone in your life that's waving the caution flag? Do you have a gut instinct that's telling you that the direction you're headed may be, well, it could be dangerous, and maybe it's time for a second opinion? If so, I encourage you, don't just blow off this piece of history that could be so very, very applicable for today's world, for today's market, for today's economy. Actually think about it as, you know what? Maybe that's something that is a precautionary tale. Maybe it's something I should look into to see if potentially I have fallen victim as well to the irrational exuberance of Alan Greenspan's day and era. I'm Matthew Johnson. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And remember, it's up to you to make today a great day.